All right, welcome everyone. So it is 12:05 according to my clock. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining the Pacific Alumni Association. And I just wanted to welcome and say thank you to Chris Schueler. For those of you who are maybe unaware, Chris Schueler is a multi-Emmy award-winning producer and director who has created over 100 television programs and documentaries in the past 20 years. And they have gathered national and international awards and have been broadcasted throughout the world. So this is going to be a really treat for us to have him today. So Chris focuses on educational and social issues. The documentaries have ranged from global warming solutions to mental health stigma, including topics as date and domestic violence, teen pregnancy prevention, AIDS, alcohol, gambling addiction, and opioid abuse. So at the end, we'll let Chris kind of talk about his current projects. And today we are going to be talking about vaping and clearing the air on vaping. Chris Schueler does have his BA in English and Theater from the University of the Pacific. All right, class of '78. So we are among Pacific alumni family here, which is awesome. And not only that, but he has also been recognized with the Pacific Alumni Association Distinguished Alumni Award in the area of public service. So a lot of what he's been doing has gone out to the public and really helped out with that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris and let us all say welcome. Thank you so much. And if you want to chat with him, go ahead and chat and I will be monitoring that. Thank you so much, Chris, and let's have some fun.
Yay, Chris. Thank you so much. You are very kind and welcome everybody. I would say it's great to see you, but I can't see any of you. So and you won't see me for long. What I'm going to share with you some pieces from this documentary that we just created on vaping that I think will be very informative, hopefully. So I produce documentary films, as Chris said, and all of them deal with social issues. We work with a lot of teenagers, both in the United States and around the world. We work with kids in Indonesia and kids in Tajikistan and Nicaragua and all over the place. And each year as we work with these young people, we always ask, what's coming up next? What is the big thing? What are you concerned about? What is your community concerned about? And 2 years ago, actually almost 3 years ago, 2017, 2018, all the students that we were talking about Ecigs and vaping. And if you can think back, it really, the Ecig momentum really didn't start picking up until 2018, 2019. So it takes us about 2 years to put a documentary together. And we started on this sort of in 2018. And what we initially do is research as much as we can through online sources, through experts, through, all the experts, the target audience. So we talk to parents, we talk to teenagers, and we try to learn as much as we can before we even start to develop the documentary. In the production timeline, probably half to 3/4 of my production timeline is research and initial pre-production before we ever take the camera out of the box. So we met some really amazing people that are experts in this field. I am not, I just sort of help tell their stories. But we had Stan Glantz. I don't know if you know that name. If you're sort of in the social work community, you probably know Stan Glantz. Amazing guy out of UCSF. He was the guy, you'll know this story, way back when he was in his office many years ago, and this box shows up. He told us this story and actually used part of it in the full documentary. A box shows up in front of his office, and in that box are all these internal documents from the tobacco companies, from Philip Morris and everybody else. And he had them, and he was the guy. He was the guy who took those, took them to Congress, the whole thing. And he was the guy whose life was threatened by the tobacco companies and all this stuff. an amazing guy, and he started this whole research and all these things. Anyway, he now heads the Center for Tobacco Control Research and Education at the University of California, San Francisco. Liat Nelson, who you'll meet during some of these videos I'm going to show you, who is a preventive medicine resident, was an incredible expert. Sean Singh Sidhu, who's a medical doctor and also a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And Donna Upson, who she's a doctor as well. She sits on the American Lung Association board. These were the experts we focused on. There were many, many experts behind the scenes who gave us all the information. And then we put the documentary together. So the big question initially, if you're a parent or if you're a teacher or if you deal with young people at any point, it's, what is happening? What is going on with vaping? It was a big thing. It really hit the national media when everybody started having these vaping issues. But the FDA and the Surgeon General both said it was an epidemic. It's in epidemic proportions. We started looking at those numbers because we're here in New Mexico. The numbers in New Mexico were about half of high school students had vaped. Half. I mean, you can't even comprehend that number. About a quarter of middle school students had vaped. I took the liberty of just checking California's numbers, and in 2017, about a third, 32% of 11th graders had vaped. 8% of 7th graders had vaped. This is the numbers. I mean, epidemic is a light term for this. The big question is, why did this take off? I mean, that's one of the questions we wanted to look at. And the scary thing is, it's easy to use. It's inexpensive, less expensive than cigarettes. There is the perception that it is safer than cigarettes, and that perception still exists, although there have been a lot of things done on it. I don't know if you had them in California, but here in New Mexico and other places around the country, the Juul company, based out of San Francisco, had full-page ads in the newspaper saying, make the switch, make the switch. They had these ads that would say, tried to quit cigarettes, started over, tried to quit cigarettes, started over, tried to quit cigarettes, started over, make the switch to Juul, quit cigarettes. And the assumption then through the ad is this is safer. The guys who created Juul, I don't know if you know much about them. We couldn't put it into the doc. We just had too much information. The guys who created Juul, maybe, it was two guys. They said they were doing it for public health reasons. They wanted it something safer than cigarettes. And everybody thinks it's water vapor. It's safer and all this. Well, the research was not in at that point when they started, and it's now come in more and more, and it's continuing on. It's not safer than cigarettes. As a matter of fact, as you'll see some of these clips, it may be worse than cigarettes. The other thing that scares me, especially with kids, is that they're not only using it for tobacco, they're using it for marijuana. They're using it for, you can put anything in the vape product. And one of our big pitches to kids was, listen, if you're at a party, don't share a vape. It used to be in our days, it was don't leave your drink sitting out, somebody will spike it with something, right? Don't share a vape. You don't know what's in it. Somebody may say it's nicotine, and it may be nicotine. It may be meth. It may be marijuana, cannabis. You just don't know. So there's all kinds of different things. I want to show you an initial clip that'll sort of give you some good background. And this clip, we break up the documentary into small segments for use in classrooms. And this is one of the ones that we start with. It's called Addicting a New Generation. Can we hear this? Whoop. I don't know if you
I'll
can.
go ahead and share that with a video or with sound this time. How about that?
Oh, good. There we go. I thought, yeah, that's funny. I can't hear it. Here it is. Oh, here it comes. Good. Thank you, Iverson. Sorry. or Iverson Center.
What's really concerning is that just recently, Altria, the largest tobacco company in the US, the ones who make Marlboro, bought 35% of Juul. So they invested $12.8 billion in cash, plus $2 billion in bonuses to acquire a third of Juul. E-cigarettes typically deliver nicotine, and youth nicotine exposure can cause addiction and harm the developing brain.
I think one of the things that's tough about this is you might not even know if your kid is vaping. So back in the old school days, using a classic Marlboro cigarette, you can smell it for a mile, right? And really no amount of cologne and mouthwash can disguise that. But with this vaping, some of the vaping aerosols are odorless, and some smell like sort of benign things, pineapple. Some of the vaping devices don't even look like cigarettes. They might look like a USB stick. They might look like a little metal canister. You wouldn't even know that it's a vaping device.
If you look at total tobacco product use among kids, it's up above where it was 5 or 10 years ago.
So the United States Surgeon General came out with a report, and the National Academies of Sciences came out with a report, both independently, showing that kids who vape go on to use regular tobacco cigarettes at much higher rates than kids who don't vape.
Kids who we would have thought would have been protected from smoking based on their demographics, their social standing, their academic prowess, those kids are more likely to use e-cigarettes and progress on to combusted cigarettes.
The tobacco companies have shifted people over from cigarettes to e-cigarettes.
I think that the real danger of vaping is that we are addicting a new generation of kids to nicotine. And we know of the dangers of nicotine and of tobacco. We know it, and we should have been on top of this and doing things to protect kids.
So obviously one of the horrible things is we're addicting this new generation to nicotine. Why is that important? As she said, nicotine causes all kinds of issues with brain development. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But also, when you look at what is in the product itself, what is in the vape is propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin. It's not water vapor. It's all these other things that we're discovering really bad stuff about. I'm going to show you just a little piece on the dangers of nicotine addiction. I mean, some of you probably already know the dangers of nicotine addiction, but interesting sort of little refresher. So let's go ahead and just show, and we'll stop at midway through probably this nicotine addiction piece, if we could, Chris.
Nicotine is the most addictive substance we know. I have patients who have quit everything else, cocaine, heroin, meth, haven't been able to quit smoking.
The way nicotine works is that it mimics the chemical your nerve cells communicate with each other with.
In smoking, some of the nicotine enters the body. When we light a cigarette, only some 15% of total quantity of nicotine enters the mouth.
When you put nicotine in your body, it binds to the acetylcholine receptor sites and stimulates them. And that's why people get a buzz when they use nicotine. It's stimulating their nervous system.
Carried by the blood, nicotine reaches the nerve cells, where it induces a complex set of reactions. The drug acts mainly on three parts of the nervous system: on the ganglia, or switchboards, of the autonomic nervous system, on the junction between nerves and the muscle, and on the brain itself.
So teenagers, and a lot of times these are middle schoolers and high schoolers who are vaping, could be as young as 12, 13, they still have a lot of brain development to go. And so what we know is that if your brain is insulted for any reason, and insulted, I mean, if your brain is harmed for any reason during critical periods of development, it can cause a lot of long-term effects.
When you are using nicotine, especially if you're a kid when your brain is still developing, and you start screwing with the communication between nerves, your nerve cells say, oh, something is amok.
Adolescent use of nicotine can harm brain areas that control attention, learning, mood, and impulse control.
What we've seen with cigarettes is when people try to quit, they have to try over and over again before they succeed. And we're actually finding the same thing is true with vaping products. People want to quit, but they start going into that nicotine withdrawal. They start feeling shaky, they start feeling that urge, and pretty soon they're vaping again.
This is a problem for everybody, but it's particularly a problem for kids because your brain is still developing up until about age 26. And by bathing it in nicotine, in this kind of faux neurotransmitter, you're getting it all confused, and so the way your brain develops is different.
So teenagers and even younger teens and adolescents and older, 5th, 6th graders who aren't teenagers yet, their brains are really primed for addiction, and the patterns that they establish during that developmental stage tend to get really deeply ingrained in their brain. So when a teenager starts smoking, it's much harder for them to quit than when a 20 or 30-year-old starts smoking.
I started around the age of 15, smoking cigarettes.
I started smoking cigarettes in 6th grade.
And the same appears to be true for vaping products. So when somebody starts vaping when they're 13, 15, 17, in that window, they more quickly appear to get addicted to the nicotine.
You can really notice when that kind of sets on because it goes from like, oh, my friends are smoking, I'll smoke with them, or I'll just have a quick cigarette, to even when you are not in the mood for a cigarette, being like, well, I need to have a cigarette.
I vape 24/7, so like I wake up, just start vaping, as I'm driving, I'm vaping. I just vape whenever I'm able to.
So my plan was never to completely go off nicotine because I like it, but I was able to be like, oh, I'm going to go down to 3 milligrams versus a cigarette, which I believe is around 12 milligrams. With these little vape pens and stuff, you can't control it. It's all the same, and they don't advertise on the packaging how much that is. So I don't know how much I'm consuming.
There have been many studies where people go out and look at the actual, they get some e-liquid from different products, and then they go put it in a mass spectrometer, and a very substantial fraction of the ones that say they don't have nicotine in them have nicotine in them. The first thing you got to know is just because something says it doesn't have any nicotine doesn't mean it doesn't have any nicotine. And the quality control in these products is terrible.
All right, and it gets worse. That's the good news. There is Stan later on in the film talks about the fact that there's the nicotine, there's the liquid, the vape liquid. Then Juul uses what's called nicotine salt. Nicotine salt that is in these actually allows you to inhale more nicotine than the liquid, and much more nicotine than is actually in cigarettes, and it won't hurt your throat as much, so you're able to inhale more, which of course increases the addictive quality, which makes it more likely you're going to become addicted. And as he mentioned, the brain development and all that, the younger you are, the more likely it is that you're going to become addicted. Dean was asking about how the audience has responded to the documentary, and I'll get to that in just a second. Very well, especially teachers, especially coaches at athletics levels in high schools. Around the country, people are starting to use this and elements of it to help educate their parents in particular, and then the kids. Before I get too far into that, though, I want to talk a little bit about cannabis and vaping. let me show you this clip, and then what they don't cover, I'm going to cover for you. This is all about cannabis and vaping. This is just a couple minutes here, real quick thing.
The other concern is that many people are using the e-cigarette devices with cannabis. It's also shown that kids who start vaping are more likely to go on to use marijuana.
What a lot of people are doing is going out and buying e-juice and a vaporizing pen and putting them together. And you can put anything you want in e-juice. So people put THC products, so marijuana products, can be dissolved in this e-juice, and then they can smoke or vape marijuana throughout the school day, throughout their home life, without there being that classic marijuana odor.
I've seen actually as high as 1 in 3 kids are using their e-cigarette for some device other than the aerosol intended for it. And so some of that could be marijuana. And the highly concentrated form of THC, the wax, which is being melted into a liquid form and then being inhaled through these cigarettes, is way, way, way more concentrated than any marijuana was, in the 60s, 70s, 80s.
This is live resin. What it is the plant is cut, and the day it is cut, it is frozen immediately and ran within 24 hours of its new life. So what that does to the THC levels, it just concentrates it from the actual flower. On average, our flower in-house tests anywhere from 20% THC to 25%. What that does is then breaks it down to about 75 to 85% when we extract all the THC and terpenes off the product. So basically just concentrating it from that flower, taking all the THC and terpenes off of the plant, and creating a very, very high intoxicating product.
A recent survey actually found that about 9% of high schoolers had used a vaporizing pen to inhale a marijuana product.
Altria also bought 45% of the Canadian cannabis company Cronos, and a lot of youth are using e-cigarette devices to vape cannabis.
So people are finding ways of using hard drugs using e-pens, and one of the things I always caution my patients about is to never share a vape at a party, because you don't actually know what's in it. You might think it's a nicotine vape, or you might think it's a marijuana vape, and next thing you know, you're high on methamphetamine.
Big problem, obviously. The other issue is, and she mentioned kids are using it in schools. I know a lot of teachers who've talked about it. They've taken away a lot of vape pens. You talk to any principal, they have vape pens like crazy that they've confiscated from their kids or their schools. You can't smell the marijuana. Back in the day, you knew who was smoking pot because it smelled, you could just smell it. With e-cigarettes and with vaping products, they have all sorts of different kinds of smells that they can make it smell. You don't smell the marijuana. The other thing is, because of the look of these little pens, some of them look like pens, some of them look like, they have all kinds of different configurations. So teachers, they look like USB drives. Teachers don't know they have them. And there is now an entire line of clothing for kids where they can hide their vape in their clothing and just pull up the thing, the hoodies and that sort of thing. It's truly mind-blowing. So the ability to get away with using these things in school or around your parents, it's just increased exponentially, and kids are taking advantage of that. So I want to change a little bit. The question, what we try to do with these, and Dean kind of alluded to it, is how do we use this tool, and what do we use to help convince kids that this is not a good thing? That's a whole social marketing discussion, which maybe we can do at another time. But one of the things we found is that we test parts of the documentary with groups of students to see what they're going to respond best to. And in some schools, we allow the students to pick out the little elements that we're going to show in their classes. The one thing that seemed to get every kid and every student that we talked to wanted to show this to their friends is this piece that I'm going to show you right now about teeth and e-cigarettes. Let's take a look at that, Chris, if we could. Hello, Chris. There we go.
Hi, Priscilla. Hi. It's nice to see you. I'm going to lean you back and take a peek, okay? Well, the concern with vaping is that vaping delivers nicotine. So the effect of nicotine is the same essentially as smoking or smokeless tobacco on the health of the gum tissue, because it decreases the blood supply to the tissue and increases your risk for gum disease. What we have come to learn about vaping is that the carrier is propylene glycol, and when that is broken down through the vaping process, the byproducts, some of them which are acidic, tend to dry the mouth tissues, leading to dry mouth, which increases your risk for tooth decay. The other portion of the e-liquid is vegetable glycerin, which when it's broken down by itself doesn't have any effect on the oral tissues. When you add the flavoring agent to the vegetable glycerin, it softens the enamel by about 27%, which increases your risk for tooth decay.
And so what we know is that vaping in and of itself is bad for your teeth. Any form of nicotine decreases blood flow to the gums, which causes tooth decay, causes bacterial overgrowth, persistent bad breath, and who would want to date you if your teeth are falling out and you have bad breath?
So you can see why teenagers think that one really strikes home. They don't believe they're going to get the lung disease. They don't believe that long-term nicotine's going to hurt them. But when you start talking about their teeth and bad breath, they sit up and pay attention. It's pretty amazing. So on the adult side, I want to talk about that just a little bit. On the adult side of this, and I'm sure you know people, I know people, we interview people for the documentary who have used vaping to get off cigarettes. And they do it for a number of reasons. One, the smell, they hate the smell in their clothes and in their car. Two, they think it's going to be healthier to get off the cigarettes themselves. And there's interesting research around that too. I mean, you're not sucking in the tar, you're not sucking, if you're doing real cigarettes. But now the research, which we don't have time to go into, shows a number of things that the propylene glycol does to your lungs that may be just as bad. But anyway, so how do you convince adults not to go into vaping? That's one of the things we looked at. And one of the answers is, obviously, you're more likely to have a heart attack, right? Or have lung problems if you smoke cigarettes. If you vape, same sort of thing. Let me show you this clip, and it really hits home with some interesting thoughts on that.
When vaping first started becoming a thing, I would do both. I mean, I didn't really have a strong preference one way or the other.
If you use e-cigarettes and continue to smoke cigarettes at the same time, which is what most e-cigarette people do, the risks actually add. So for example, for heart attacks, the risk of smoking cigarettes about doubles to triples the odds of having a heart attack. The risk of using e-cigarettes about doubles the risk of having a heart attack. If you're a dual user, if you're using them both at the same time, the risk goes up by about a factor of 6. So these risks compound. And the same thing has been found for lung disease, that if you're a smoker, you have a certain risk. If you use e-cigarettes, you have a certain risk. If you use both products at the same time, which is what most people do, then those risks compound and you're actually worse off by using the e-cigarettes.
So the compounding factor, if you're doing both e-cigarettes and smoking, which as people are trying to get off smoking cigarettes, they tend to do both, as we heard the young man saying. It doesn't just double or triple, it compounds. It puts both of them together in terms of the heart attack risk and the lung disease risk. There's a couple other things, and I don't want to go into all these things, and maybe we can take some questions here because we could go into a number of directions. Some people wonder about secondhand e-cig smoke And is it as bad as regular smoking cigarettes? And the answer is yes. Secondhand e-cig emissions are the same thing. And what you're doing with e-cigs, and Monica, glad you got that information. What you're doing with e-cigs, it may smell better than smoking regular cigarettes, but you're actually inhaling, and the secondhand smoke has the same stuff. You've got acetaldehyde, acrolein, formaldehyde. We have the students talk about that in the documentary. All these, we all know what formaldehyde is. Well, if you're sucking that into your lungs, it can't be a good thing. And all this is part of it. Heavy metals are in it. There's benzene, which is in it, which is found in car exhaust. There's all these things that occur as you use the vape pens and the e-cigs. So, all right, so you get the idea. It's pretty bad news. I want to show you one more video, very short video, and then we're going to take a look. Okay. Is everybody ready? Dave, are you ready? Good. Hang on, stand by. Here we go. 11:15:30.
The smoke produced by e-cigarettes
is not
water vapor.
And it isn't harmless.
The two primary ingredients found in e-cigarettes are
Propylene glycol,
and vegetable glycerin.
Both chemicals are toxic
to your cells.
Okay, perfect. That's good. You're done. Thank you. Excellent. We intersperse those throughout the documentary, sort of to lighten things up and give you a little laugh. But these students were just fabulous. They're from 3 or 4 different schools that worked with us on the project. Somebody was asking how Dean. Thank you, Dean. Glad you're there. How has the vaping industry been impacted by all the new research? Pretty severely, I think. It's interesting. You may have heard Juul is struggling now and is really having trouble with their company. Glad to hear that. Altria, as you heard at the very beginning, they had bought a big chunk of Juul. Well, their investment has really sagged. I mean, they put all these billions of dollars into it, and now it's not worth half what they invested in, which is probably a good thing. So the new research is showing a lot of information that I think people are taking to heart. And the campaigns that have now been out, this one included, I think have helped young people and parents understand. Parents used to say to me, this was interesting, when we have to get money to do these documentaries. So I went to the Department of Health here in New Mexico to ask them if they would help fund part of the documentary. And I was talking to the head of the Department of Health about vaping, who is a doctor, who is a wonderful person. They've helped me on a couple different projects. And she said, so how bad is the vaping thing? And I was telling her some of the research that we had. And she said, oh my God. And I said, why? And she goes, my son vapes. And I said, well, have you talked to him about it? And she said, I thought it was better for him than cigarettes. And so I think and this was, what, a year and a half ago. So I think the perception of vaping being safe has changed pretty dramatically. The research that's out, especially in England, when you look at, and there was a big research study that was done regarding vaping, and is it more helpful to get you off cigarettes than the gum or the patch? And you may have seen this research. It came out maybe 6 to 8 months ago. And it said that the vaping was more effective than the gum or the patch. And what they didn't tell you, and I read the study just so I could see what was going on, what they didn't tell you was the people in the study had already tried the gum and the patch and been unsuccessful with quitting. So vaping was easier for them to use and was more effective because they'd already not been successful with the gum and the patch. The other thing they didn't tell you was after a year of using the gum or the patch or the vaping, the groups that had gotten off of cigarettes, the people who used the gum and the patch were also off the gum and the patch. They were totally free and clear. The people who vaped, 85% of them were still vaping after a year. So they just traded the cigarettes for the vape. That wasn't listed in the study. I mean, that wasn't the headline from the study that the media picked up. So there's a lot of different things. So we've got 20 minutes or so. I've sort of given you my big spiel. What questions do you have? Do I just pull those up here in the Q&A, Chris, or do we look at, let's see, okay, nothing on the Q&A. I could chat on. Let me see if there's anything over on the chat side. There we go.
Yeah, so I think you have been answering the questions as we've been kind of going through. Dean has been asking some questions in the chat. I did put, someone had a question about being able to see the video and if they were able to download that. So if you want to respond to...
so everybody has that information. Thank you, Chris. The easiest thing to do is go to NM Vape, NM like New Mexico, vape.info. And on that website, there are a number of things. One is there's a free downloadable curriculum/viewer guide. It's built in 3 stages. So there's a section for mid schools, there's a section for high schools, there's a section for adults. And there it is, nmvape.info. And you can download that and use that. It's sort of turnkey. It shows you what to do. At the very bottom of that website, we've had students, a number of high school students all over the place who have put together posters and memes and all sorts of stuff about the dangers of vaping and why not to vape. That is at the bottom. We call it teen marketing materials made by teens for teens. And you can download those and use those with your schools or whatever else you want. Then there is you can download the full vape documentary. And I believe for personal use, it's like $5. For groups under 30, it's maybe, I don't know, $10. And for groups over 30, it's like $15. And the fact of the matter is, you're tigers. If you don't have the money, you want them, just email me directly and I'll send you the link. We want to try to pay for the website is what we're trying to do. But so you can download it that way. And it's got the full documentary, or it's got small sections of the documentary, or it's got really small sections that can be used and broken up. So you can download any of that through that. And would love for you to use it. It's being used all over the country now in schools, and especially in athletic departments, which is interesting enough. It's a really good thing.
Yeah, wonderful, Chris. So thank you for sharing that. So everything that you've been talking about, you've just been very passionate, and it's been wonderful to see that passion come through. What got you interested in social documentary filmmaking?
Way back when, I would invite you on my website, on christopherproductions.org, we're an organism. There is a TED talk that I did, which Dean has heard, because I practiced it at Pacific actually a few years ago when you were kind enough to give me that award. And I practiced it on some of the students there. But it talked about the fact that way back in the 80s, I was on television with the CBS affiliate and doing a talk show, and I have my teaching credential from Pacific. So my heart is sort of with the high school students, and I love working with them. So we started doing a project called News 101, which had high school students doing segments for the evening news on issues that were important to them. And I noticed that they were all sort of repeating the same kinds of issues, not only in New Mexico, but in other places as we syndicated this. The Native Americans in New Mexico were doing the same things that Native Hawaiians were doing and had the same sort of issues. So we started doing full-length 30-minute, 1-hour documentaries on these issues and doing them in tandem and with young people. And the more we did that, the more excited I became about the potential for changing people's views and hopefully changing things for the better. And we started doing things that were affecting public policy in different places around the world. Nicaragua, a great example there with the AIDS epidemic when it was moving in from Honduras. We did a big project there with young people all over Nicaragua. And they did short segments and stories that were on the newscast about how you got AIDS. Essentially, they wouldn't even talk about it there before that. So anyway, this got me very excited, and it allowed me to combine what I love, which is television production and journalism, with young people and teaching, and hopefully doing social issues. So that's the short story.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And so with those social issues, I know I mentioned a couple at the very beginning. What were some of your favorites that you reached out and had documentaries built on?
I always say the last one we did is my favorite. So the vape one is my favorite. But before that, actually, the mental health piece was eye-opening. We did one on mental health. You can find all these on the ChristopherProductions.org website. We did one just before the opioid epidemic hit, called No Exceptions, and learning about how addiction works in the brain and how opioids worked in the brain and what happened, how the opioid epidemic started. And now we're seeing that sort of play out, how the pharmacy companies were in fact pushing the opioids, was mind-blowing to me. And meeting kids and parents who were dealing with opioid addiction, it was, as they always said, we do a lot of research beforehand, and we were meeting with all these people and talking with these issues, and everybody said it was this horrible roller coaster ride. And we ended up filming the entire show on a roller coaster with these kids and their parents, and it was quite an eye-opening experience, very moving experience. So that, you know, there's any number of social issues that are so important along the way, and I just feel so fortunate to be able to tell some of these stories and hopefully make some small difference.
Great, yeah, and you mentioned, and we'll have the link on the website when we post this, ChristopherProductions.org, so that way people can check those out. It's very great. So what do you have next in mind? What are you working on? What currently is holding your interest?
Well, you know, I always like to say we've been sort of ahead of the game. Well, 4 months ago, that would have been what, January of this past year. We had been, a year before that, we had been working up to doing a huge documentary on, guess what, vaccinations. And in February, we put together a meeting in Phoenix that was supposed to take place in late March with the heads of CVS, Walgreens, the doctor heads of a number of major medical institutions, to talk about vaccine hesitant parents and how vaccines work and herd immunity and all those things. And of course, we all know what happened. So my hope is to get back to that, because it's obviously going to be a really crucial issue in terms of vaccinations, but how vaccines work and how they got a bad rap and all those things were sort of the one that we were looking at. There's another project that I'm really interested in working on that would take place in France, and we're just trying to set up now to film there a year from now. Lord willing, everything's better by then and we can get in there. And it's sort of a historic, this is more fun. So we do all the happy topics of opioid addiction and alcohol addiction and marijuana and, you know, all the happy stuff. Well, this one would be actually really fun. I have a friend who is one of the leading chefs in Paris, and every summer he goes to be the cook for French royalty at this beautiful castle in the south of France. Dean's heard this story before, but he's there this summer. They had him in there, and he has an incredible historical archive of the history of food in France, and he also is this incredible chef. And he spends the whole summer in this beautiful castle. So the cook in the castle is something we're looking at and hopeful to do next year. We always have about 10 or 15 projects on the burner, so we'll see what makes financially and what's possible hopefully soon. And I hope to work with Media X at Pacific, Kevin Pontucci and the team over there, Gary Armanack, and they just have some incredible people there. And we're hoping to work with those students. Dean and I go out every year and do a one weekend media mash with the students. Hopefully we can do that again this fall if things clear up. But I hope to do more things with students at Pacific too. That would be great.
Yeah, that was something that just came up through the chat too, as well, was how you actually use your experience to support students at Pacific. And so you kind of talked about Media X. Is there anything else I know that you enjoy about coming back to Pacific? What's your favorite part about coming back to Pacific?
Wow. Well, you know, Pacific was such an important time. When you're going to college, it's the important time in your life. The people that you meet, the professors, the one-on-one interaction. I was talking to Kevin, who's the head of Media X now, about that during our talk last week online. And the personal interaction with professors was so important in my life. And you look back and you go, oh my gosh, you know, this really changed my trajectory. And the people that I met there at that time really helped me guide where I am today. And so to come back and be on campus and be part of the energy of Pacific and those small interactions, which is the beautiful thing, really energizes me tremendously. So that's, and of course it's such a beautiful campus. We all know that. It's just spectacular. So, and then I had a Zoom meeting last week with Media X students, and told them, as I will tell you, whoever's watching, Andy and Polly and everybody else, if you have anything you want to talk about or you need help with, or you want advice for, or whatever, anything that you think I might be helpful with, just email me or call or Zoom or FaceTime or whatever. So one of the students, and I love this, one of the students from Media X contacted me right after the Zoom meeting, and I had a long conversation with her 3 days ago. She wants to do claymation. And she really, and she's very good at it. She sent me a couple of her clips, just did a great job. So I'm hooking her up with my chief editor, who was the assistant editor for a movie called Hell or High Water that won the Academy Award a couple of years ago. He was the assistant editor on that. The guy is an incredible editor and animator. So I'm gonna hook her up with him, and hopefully that'll lead to something. But that to me is really fun, to help mentor and come back and do that with those students. Really energizes me tremendously.
Very awesome. Yeah, that's always great to see that mentorship and continuing on that Tiger family. So we're getting just about the finish time of our lunch hour. Is there anything else that you would like to leave, kind of last thoughts with our audience today? And if anyone else has any questions, go ahead and feel free to type those in.
Sure. Two things. One is I would be glad to, most of our programs, and we've covered a lot. We have covered alcohol, we have covered netiquette, internet safety and all those things, bullying, virtually every social issue that affects teenagers today here and around the world, we have done something on. It's all on my website at christopherproductions.org. And if you go there and you go to the projects, there's just a huge list. You click on the project and it will take you, many of these have their own websites with downloadable videos, with downloadable curriculums. We just want the stuff out there and be able to use the things. So please feel free to do that. If you have questions, or it's hard to navigate or you can't get through, email me directly and I'll be glad to send those off to you, especially for teachers, principals at mid schools or high school levels. Love to give you that information. I know funding is always tough. You can download things for, $10 or $15, but if that's a problem, and it is, in some instances, let me know. I'll be glad to send you the clips free. And we do that a lot all over the place. The last thing I'd like to say is we live in such interesting times. I did a talk yesterday with high school students who were in student councils all over the country. There were, 400 or 500 kids on the talk. And we talked about the fact that they are in an incredibly unique position to change the world, because they are digital natives and they're comfortable in this environment, like most of us are not, who are over the age of 45, or in Dean's case, over the age of 60. They have access through distribution that we never had before with Snapchat and Instagram and Reddit and all the different things. So the distribution access is there. And we can see the power of images and memes right now. I mean, the Floyd incident has changed the discourse in this country about police. No matter what side you're on, it has brought up the discussion of racism in a way that we've never seen before because of the image that we saw. So I'm very proud to be doing documentaries and using images, hopefully for the good and to share. But I'd encourage you to talk to your kids, talk to your grandkids, talk to your students about images and how they can be used for good and for bad, and the difference between truth and honesty, which we didn't have a chance to go into here, but boy, you have to know what's real and what's not real. And it's tough these days. So anyway, that's it. I'm so excited to be here with you all. It's just great I can't see you, but I can see your names, all the tigers out there. This is fabulous.
All right. Thank you so much. So we have one more.